Hello everyone and welcome back to You Need This Book in Your Life, the weekly book review show in which the host hopes that eventually you will come to appreciate the sound of his voice as much as he does. And this week I'm going to be talking about a book called Natives by the rapper, mathematician, polemicist and all-round Renaissance man Akala. And this is probably the most... This is the discussion and the review that I'm going to find the most challenging, because this book, in the classic book review parlance, defies categorization. And what I mean by that is this book is an excellent autobiography. It's an excellent sort of social history and global and political history. It's a very powerful anthropological study. There's a lot of sociology in there. And it's an incredibly powerful personal account of stuff which has an international resonance. There is no pigeonhole that you could slide this book into other than fantastic. So how to describe what Akala does is it's a kind of a look at race and class in 21st century Britain and how those two intersect, how one feeds off the other, and how I would say racial discrimination is part of the apparatus of class discrimination. And there's some incredibly powerful stuff in there. If you work on the basis that the British class system is pernicious, it's not just a question of, or certainly seen from Akala's perspective and the perspective of people of colour, it's not just a question of the old Two Ronnies sketch, or the Two Ronnies sketch with John Cleese, where you've got upper class, middle class and lower class. It's, imagine a sketch in which John Cleese doesn't just look down on the other two guys, but he actively contributes to embedding racism within the institutions, whereby he forces Ronnie Corbett's character to be trodden on a regular basis by the middle character played by Ronnie Barker. And what I mean by that is the structures that society has, whether it's political, whether it's financial, whether it's in education, which is crucial, there is a kind of a racial bias encoded into those. Anything that sort of comes up from those 19th century roots of thinking that white Britons could go around the world subjugating inferior peoples, the institutions which were built around that time and in the centuries before, it's not like at some point in the mid 1960s there was a click and all of that prejudice was gone. It still exists, and yeah, that means sort of underrepresentation of people of colour in all positions of power, but it also means the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about others, the way we interact, the way in which biases are kind of encoded into the language that we use. That's how powerful it is. And the class system is self-serving, specifically in the terms of education. If you think, we all know the name of William Wilberforce, the kind of hero who ended slavery. Well, as Akala will tell you, and indeed does in Natives, slavery wasn't just something that was brought about in order to be cancelled by this hero who came along. It was perpetuated for centuries with not just the complicity but the profit motive in mind of the British ruling class. It wasn't an accident of history. Britain at that time was an active it was a pioneer of the transatlantic slave trade, and there was an intellectual framework of prejudice that grew up around that made it possible. If you read Solzhenitsyn, he will tell you the same thing around the worst atrocities are committed by people who believe that they were doing the right thing, and it's much the same with slavery. We have, similarly through education, but also culturally, we have this jaded view of ourselves, or not jaded, but it's sort of very selectively edited, in that we see Britain as unambiguously as the hero and the saviour and the sort of global Britain exporting the sort of democratic values that we hold dear. And Certainly, I don't want this to come across like I'm a profoundly unpatriotic person. I'm definitely not. If you'd like, in a future video, I will show you the England tattoo on my right calf, written in Old English script. But we infantilise ourselves if we think that British history has been uniquely positive, and there's a very powerful comparison in there. British, or certainly over the last year or so, and going back decades before that, we love to talk about Dunkirk spirit. We don't tend to talk about the spirit of Amritsar, for example, referencing the massacre in India. Again, in education, there is a kind of a pseudo-scientific basis to the thinking of many people. Now, one of the more powerful things that Akala sort of flags up, of which I was unaware, is that in the sort of Jamaican communities where he grew up, and in black communities, there was a second school which he would attend, run by sort of local community leaders in the black community, because it was accepted and acknowledged that they wouldn't get a full and complete education that sort of best served them from a white school, which is essentially what it was. And there's a shocking anecdote in there about an argument that he had with his teacher, and you can imagine Akala, all through the book you get this sense of an extremely powerful mind that would have been challenging to teachers and not afraid to hold back. He talks about a teacher that he had who was not racist in the kind of evident knuckle-dragging EDL or National Front at the time way, but in the unconscious bias, or in the hidden bias, let's say, interacted with him in a way that was different to the other kids. Now, when the subject of race came up, Akala's having a conversation with his teacher and argues the toss about whether black people are predestined to commit crimes or whether the KKK were racist. And she actually says to a young black lad, eventually once he's wound her, or once she's become so wound up by having to argue with this pupil, she says, the KKK reduced crime by killing black people, which is, this is a teacher in the British school system. Akala, I think, is around my age, so we're not talking ancient history here. And this is a teacher who ultimately has to be cajoled into doing it, but spits out a belief which is, there is no daylight whatsoever between that theory and Nazi ideology, you know, other than one spoke in the German language. It's that's you can find that level of racism in positions of power, and it's arguably not by accident, as Akala puts across. Now, I don't want to give the impression that this is the embittered memoir of a young Jamaican school kid in the British school system. This is a powerfully internationalist book. It's like a travelogue almost. You have trips to Jamaica, you have his life in the United States, you have, inner city London, but you also have discussion around Africa. The only place that he doesn't touch upon is India, because he doesn't have the knowledge of the caste system, and it's very refreshing to see an author admit, I don't know enough about this to discuss it, which kind of, to me, throws into sharper focus all of the stuff he does know about. And if there's a takeaway I could take from reading Natives, it is that racism isn't just an issue of politeness. It's not just about using the right or wrong words to describe people. It's a question of privilege and how biases can grow up. If you think about institutions, whether it be local government, whether it be national government, whether it be schools, whether it be financial institutions, they don't consist of cogs and machines. They consist of people, and the prejudices of those people can be writ large within the institution itself. Obviously, the sort of principal one you'd imagine from a young black Londoner is the Metropolitan Police and their approach to privilege, or their approach to privileging white people over black people. The number of times where Akala is stopped by the police it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. There's actually one instance where he's going to collect an honorary doctorate for, I think it's maths, and he gets pulled over and questioned because the police they think it's suspicious that a reasonably young black guy could be driving a fairly nice car. it's unfathomable that someone's experience in Britain is so different to mine. I've never been stopped by the police ever in sort of 20 odd years of driving. Now, it may sound very depressing, as if the massed ranks of all the country's institutions are against you, and certainly Akala isn't necessarily 100% purely hopeful, and he doesn't say things can and will definitely change, but there is a message in here that Britain isn't a doomed, bigoted, racist backwater like the last few years would have you believe. There is also a very powerful English radical tradition. Work on the basis that 100 years before the French killed their monarch, the British monarch was removed peacefully. Oh, well, no, let's not even go there. Cutting his head off isn't peaceful, but, you know, I'm referencing a different book and the Glorious Revolution there. But suffice to say, English radicalism has proved before that it can win, and it can win again. I would say, as I regularly do, it just needs those of us who care about progressive values to actually invest something in it. So, in conclusion, do you need this book in your life? Yes. Yes. I say this on a weekly basis, but you definitely need this book in your life. It is superb, and I don't mean just superb. I mean, Natives is a work of sufficient power and quality and precision and acute observation that it deserves. In time, it merits sort of inclusion in the pantheon of great books alongside things like The Capital or Wealth of Nations or That Real Hall of Fame. That's how powerful this is. It always astounds me about Akala. There are probably 5 things which he is at which he is an elite level contributor, which I can't name 5 things that I'm actually good at, much less elite. You know, it's an incredible mind. Natives is the work of a phenomenally powerful writer. Again, it's one of those books that changed my perspective. Go out there, pick up a copy. If you get the audio book, that's what I did. Hearing him read it is immensely, sort of an immensely rewarding experience. So yes, go out there and get his book in your life. Continuing the theme of recent weeks, next week I'm going to be discussing a book called How to Argue with a Racist by Dr. Adam Rutherford. So stick around for that. It's a book which shows how the scientific evidence does not back up the pseudo-scientific nonsense which is unfortunately rearing its head in our society again. But for now, I will say thank you for watching, thank you for your patience. I would love it if you would leave a like, share this on your own social media channels, and of course subscribe, because I could always use the exposure. So failing that, I will see you next week, Sunday 8 PM everyone. Cheers.